Greetings on the occasion of Madras Day. Today, let's celebrate it by going on a tour of Fort St. George. To most people, the Fort St. George is where the Secretariat is, where the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly is, but they don't realize that there's a lot more history to it. Some people will say that there is a fort museum and there is the Church of St. Mary's, but what is there beyond that? But the church itself is just one of several items of historic interest inside Fort St. George. Today, if you go to the fort, the first thing that strikes you is the flagstaff, 148 feet in height and with the Indian flag flying on top of it very proudly. The first flagstaff dated back to 1688 and it survived till the 1990s. It was made of wood and it flew the Union Jack at one time, and after independence it came to fly the Indian flag. But in the 1990s, the flagstaff began to show signs of weakness, and then it was removed and replaced with a steel replica, and that is the one that still stands near the fort. Today, when you want to enter the fort, you go through a side gate after having entered your name in the register. But is that the only gate? No, there are several others. Actually, the fort has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entrances. What are all these entrances? Today, the ministers and the important government officials drive in through a pair of gates into the fort. But that gate itself was constructed only between the two world wars. The original eastern gate of the fort is below the flagstaff, and to see it, you have to look deep inside the moat. Both the gates have been blocked, but at one time they were known as the Waters Gate. Why were they known as the Waters Gate? Because the sea came very close to Fort St. George. It was just around 100 meters away in high tide, and it was only after the construction of the harbour began that the sea began to recede, and today you see it a few kilometers away. So that was Waters Gate, completely blocked up today. What are all the other gates in the fort? You have on the southern side St. Thomas's Gate. On the southwestern side you have Valaja's Gate. On the western side you have St. George's Gate. And on the northern side, no prizes for guessing, North Gate. St. Thomas's Gate gets its name because San Thome, the Portuguese town, was on the southern side. Valaja's Gate gets its name because the Nawabs lived in Chepauk, and that was the entry through which people could go and visit them. St. George's Gate took you into the city of Madras, and North Gate took you to Georgetown. This was how the gates were laid out. It was a city by itself, and therefore it had streets, and each street had a name. Today when you go in, you'll find them all still marked: St. Thomas's Street, Middle Street, North Street, York Street, Gloucester Street, Charles Street, Palace Street, and so on. All of them with their names marked neatly. In the city, names keep changing. But in the fort, the names have remained the same for over 300 years. And then you see the main assembly cum secretariat building. The present structure only goes back to the early 20th century. But at its core is what was called Fort House. And that is where the early governors of Fort St. George lived. And that was one of the first structures that was put up when the British came to the fort. It has expanded over a period of time. Behind it is Parade Square, which is where the army used to conduct marches every day in the morning once and then in the evening again. Close by is the Church of St. Mary's, the oldest Anglican church east of the Suez Canal. It's full of monuments to departed Englishmen and women. And then you have St. Thomas's Street leading by its side. In Charles Street, you have the beautiful Clive's house, which is today the headquarters of the Archaeological Survey of India. Clive, it is said, lived in it for a couple of years. Then by the side, you have a house that has sadly collapsed, and that is called Wellsleys House. Arthur Wellesley was one of the people who played a key role in the defeat of Tipu Sultan. Later, he went back to England, defeated Napoleon in Europe, and was elevated and made the Duke of Wellington. He became Prime Minister of England twice. And because of that, that building was preserved for a long time and was known as Wellesleys House. Because the fort was a city, it had a hospital, it had a barracks, it had police stations, it had a mint, and everything. All of them have vanished, leaving not a trace behind. But on one side, you have the enormous King's Barracks. King's Barracks of 2 floors, each floor of 100,000 square feet, is the largest barracks in the whole of the country. Today, it is not in great condition, but it is still worth a visit. Just near the entrance of the fort, you have what is called the Fort Museum. The museum itself came up in 1948 because the Englishmen, when they were leaving, decided that they had to leave something behind of their time over here. But the building itself dates to almost 300 years before that. What was it then? It was called the Exchange. That is where the merchants used to congregate on the first floor and look out into the sea. When the ships came, they would know what commodities were arriving, and the prices of the commodities would keep fluctuating. This was the commodity exchange. And therefore, this building was also known as the Exchange. Today, we call it the Fort Museum. All around the fort, you will find cannons. Sadly, we never had a war after the fort was built. The last time somebody came to attack Fort St. George was in the 1780s, and that was Tipu Sultan. So many of these cannons have just been brought here from various places and kept here for display. That, in a nutshell, is some of the things that you can see in Fort St. George. There is a lot more to it, but I'll conclude this video over here, wishing you a happy Madras Day, and I promise to be back with you with many more interesting episodes. Bye for now.